Now for the video that I do that is called What I've Learned This Week. Obviously what I've learned this week is about the power dynamics between the various races in some Western democracies. The things that I've learned that have been of true value have been from talking to my friend Professor Kehinde Andrews of Birmingham University, who talks about racial politics and power dynamics from a kind of global and economic perspective, pointing out that there can be no real change, significant change in racial dynamics unless economic inequality is redressed. Now, this is an important thing to say because, of course, it's very important that we do things like put up black tiles or don't put up black tiles or whatever it is like that we can do that's, you know, on our phones. But what's more significant than that, even than any personal change, or even than educating one another, particularly if we live in insular, isolated communities where we don't encounter much diversity. These things are all important, educating ourselves. But what is significant is that at the hard edge of racism, obviously there is the brutality that we witnessed and murder of the last week. But, and this is what I've learned from Kehinde Andrews, is that racism is little kids in the Congo mining materials for the very phone that you're watching this on now. To change the world, it requires for us to sacrifice. Are we willing to give up some of those of us that have access to, and if you're watching this on a phone then it does include you, the kind of consumer treats that hold this unequal, unfair and ultimately unfulfilling society in place? What I have learned this week is that whether you're talking about sexual equality or racial equality or economic equality, it don't matter under what guise or through what lens you're regarding it. It's going to require radical systemic change. And in fact, the word that Kehinde used is revolution. People don't like that word because it has connotations, but I suppose what it means is it possible to change and alter the police forces in America? What does the data tell you? Is it possible to alter the prison and judicial system in America, England? I'm not saying this is just about America. It's certainly not what I've been learning. Global problem, you know. Or is there a degree of, not just a degree, total abolition required of these systems and structures that new things can be formed that are fair and just? I don't think we're talking about something as superficial as changing the people that operate in the existing institutions. I think we're talking about changing those institutions themselves. This is what I have felt for a long time from a different, you know, without particular regard to race except as how it relates to inequality. Now, having been confronted, as we all have, with like what anyone who has personal experience will tell you ain't a new phenomena but an ongoing perennial one. What I've learned is that through this lens, the reason that this is such a important subject for everybody is because it strikes at the heart of what is wrong with our communities, that we live detached, distractive lives where we inhabit false concepts, false structures that are ultimately realizations of economic ideals that, while they do superficially benefit some of us, and I'd have to include myself in that, look, I've got access to all sorts of things, you know, we are all impoverished spiritually because we are operating within a system that causes suffering, whether it's the type of suffering that we've witnessed this week or the suffering that we've come to accept, the exploitation of people across the continent of Africa, the almost slavery in countries like, you know, India, what is known as the developing world, where people work to provide the product. So what I've learned this week is that the solution to these problems is that it's a radical and serious problem, and the solutions are radical and serious, and I'm willing to participate, but I know it's not an easy thing to do for anybody because it involves sacrifice and it involves change, and sacrifice and change are hard things to do, but they're not as hard as being murdered or living in unequal and unfair societies. So I suppose all of us have to ask ourselves who we are really, who are we really?